on page Zion of the downloads of the Mimer, line 10, Ois Dal. So in the Mimer, we were talking about that Eila Masei Bnei Yisrael, these are the journeys of the Bnei Yisrael, Asher Yotzu Me Eretz Mitzrayim, that all the 42 Masois, all the 42 journeys from when they came out of Mitzrayim until they went into Eretz Yisrael, the Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah, is really all one journey. It's all one trip. It's all one going out of Mitzrayim. It wasn't just when they went from Ramses to Sukkot, they went out of Mitzrayim, but all the 42 journeys. That's why it says, Eila Masei in the plural, these are the journeys, Asher Yotzu, that they went out, that all of these 42 journeys, they went out of Mitzrayim. The Rebbe then expands that to say that it's not just the going out of Mitzrayim to go to Eretz Yisrael, but it also is like it says in the pasuk, that the wonders of Mashiach is like the days of you going out of Mitzrayim, that all the days from Yetzias Mitzrayim until Mashiach comes, it's all days of going out of Mitzrayim. They are all considered the travels of the Yidden leaving Mitzrayim. In a similar vein, it hinted also on the fact that the Alter Rebbe emphasizes that until their encampment al Yarden Yerecha, Yerecha is the level of Reach, Reach is the level having to do with Mashiach, like it says, Vayricha b'yiras Hashem, that he will be able to send out, he will judge based on the sense of smell, and therefore, so it's referring to the entire period till Mashiach's times, and this also fits in what the Baal Shem Tov says, that every person, when he comes down into this world, goes through 42 journeys, starting from leaving the Mitzrayim, leaving the constraints of being literally being born. He's coming out of a stage of constraints, and then throughout his lifetime, until he reaches the level of Aricha B'yiras Hashem, it's 42 travels and 42 trips. And then the Rebbe connected this with what it says in the pasuk. The Alter Rebbe says that the pasuk first says, "Vayichtov Moshe es Moitzeim l'Maseihem." First, it says he wrote down, he transcribed their going out to their journeys, and then it says these are the journeys, these are the Maseiim l'Moitzeim. So why does he flip it around? So the Rebbe explains, the Rebbe explains, look at the Torah, Moitzeim is referring to the source of the neshama above, where the neshama comes out from, and that level of the neshama coming out is brought down. A ray of that, the Alter Rebbe brings down, must empower the Yid down here in his journeys, so that from his journeys and through his journeys, he should be able to go Maseihem l'Moitzeim. From their journeys, he should be able to go up to their source, back to return to where they came out from originally. So that's why it flips it around. First, first you have the level coming down to illuminate from the source of the neshama above, the mites of the neshama above, to impact their travels down here, and then they're able to go back up and to return with the travels to the source where they came up. So now the Rebbe is going to explain, first of all, what is this idea that it says Vayichtov Moshe? What's the idea that Moshe wrote down the Moitzeim, L'Maseihem, the whole Torah Moshe wrote down? What's the idea that specifically he says that Moshe Rabbeinu transcribed Moitzeim, L'Maseihem? What's the significance? What are we trying to say that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote this down? So again, Ois Daled, line 10, page Zayin. Mamshech Levayir, the Alter Rebbe continues to explain Likutei Torah, Masha Kosev, what it says in the pasuk Vayichtov Moshe, that Moshe wrote down. So he explains it Al Pi Masha Kosev b'Makom Acher b'Maskel Im Choisai, according to what it says in a different place in the Maimer entitled Im Choisai, that Choisai, which means laws and statutes, decrees, we have throughout the Marach Chassidus, is also related to the concept of Chakika, engraving. Just like in Torah, there are two levels. There's Oisis, a Chakika. There's the engraved letters of the Torah, Sheina Oisis Shabaluchas, these are the letters that are to be found in the two luchas that Moshe had. Shebehem Namar Choros al luchas, concerning luchas, it says they were engraved on the luchas on the tablets. Sha'oisius Einon Davar Noisef Ala Evan, that the letters are not something additional to the stone, like, for example, ink and parchment. The ink and parchment are two separate things, but they're joined together, but they're still two separate things that are joined. But when you engrave letters on the stone, they are from and in the stone itself, like we had in the previous mimer. We actually learned this earlier, a few weeks ago, that the different levels in the engraved letters itself. There's those engraved letters that are just engraved on the surface of the stone, that even though they're engraved and the letters are not something separate than the stone, but still they allow for dust to gather over there, and they're not as brilliant in the place of the engraving. The ultimate engraving is like the engraving on the luchas, which was engraving through and through. But over here in the Maimer, it's not important over here. Over here, it's just important to contrast engraving to writing. So the Rebbe goes on to say, line 18, the written letters that there is in the Torah, just like there's in the Torah, there is engraved letters, and there's written letters physically. The physical Torah has that. So too, every Yid's connection with the Eibishter is in a similar way. Came b'chol nitzitz Israel. So too, in every spark of every Jewish person, yes, gam shtei bechinas elu. There's also these two levels. There is his connection with the Eibishter in such a way, the way he is above, that over there he and the Eibishter are not two separate things. He and the Eibishter are completely one, like engraved letters are one with the item that they're engraved in, versus the neshama, the ha'ara of the neshama, the ray of the neshama, the way it comes down here. And that is already like written letters. That written letters over there is like two separate and distinct things between the writing and the letters, and therefore writing can become erased and separated from the parchment, etc., etc. And he says, the level that we say where they come out from, the moitza'ehem l'masa'ehem, that's the root of the neshama, where it comes from above, like we mentioned earlier. That's from the level of the engraved letters, the level of the neshama, the way it's above. That's a level that's engraved. It says, there's an expression of Chazal, so this brings us down, that the neshamas were chatzuvos mitachas kisei hakavod. They were chiseled out. They were hewn out from under the throne of glory. So we see this idea that the neshama, the way it's above, is likened to engravings. Shalzen Emar, concerning this, it says, Galif glifu betehiru ilah. It says in Lashon Kabbalah, it says that he engraved an engraving in the purity or the brilliance of above. For example, it says, Etzem hashamayim latoyar, like the essence of the heavens to its purity, to its brilliance. Like, in other words, the sky in a sunny day is very brilliant. So in this supernal brilliance, whatever that brilliance level is, there's a level where there was engraving done. So that is the source of the neshama. The neshama was engraved and hewn out from this supernal level of brilliance. And that's the level of the neshama that we say in Birchas HaShachar, we say in Al Kai Neshama every morning, we say Neshama Shnasata B'Tahorehi, before we say Ata Barasa, you created her. So before it came down in a way of creation, when it was still in the way of higher than creation, that is the level of Tahorehi. That's the level of the connection with the Tehiru Ilah, the level where it's engraved. It came down, it was drawn down from the level of the supernal brilliance and brightness and so on. That is the neshama above. But the descent of the neshama down here in the body, down here below in the body, that is letters that are like written letters, because there's a possibility, at least externally, to be a separation, just like we know. We're learning in Ger Satshuva these days. There's the idea of having the sins of a person separate between a Yid and the Eibishter. There's the idea of the strand of the neshama, the rope of the neshama, Yaakov Chavel Nachlosai. You can cut different strands, or Chas v'Shalom, the entire rope of the neshama can be cut. There's an idea of separation. That's like written letters. So therefore, what is the meaning when we say Vayichtov Moshe? Moshe, like we said before, when it says Elam Maseh B'nei Yisrael, Moitze'ehem L'Maseihem, we're not just referring to what happened, the neshama, where it came from, but we're talking about, like I mentioned before, and the Maimer before says, that a ha'ara comes down from Moitze'ehem to enable their Masei. A ha'ara, a ray, an illumination, an empowerment comes down from their source above to the neshama the way it's down here below. Who administers that? Who channels that ray of the Shoresh neshama to enable us to go on our journeys of the Masayim, the Moitzayim, to go all of our journeys to return to our source? So the Rebbe says that's Moshe Rabbeinu, line 25. Therefore, so that there should be able to be that hamshach from their source, where they came out from initially, so there shouldn't be that disconnect. So therefore, it's Nemar, it says, Vayichtov Moshe Moitze'eim. Therefore, Moshe had to write down the Moitze'eim. In other words, Dahainu, Shehimshach, B'bchinas Oisis, Hachkika, Lislabish B'ois Saksav. Moshe Rabbeinu, writing it down means he drew down, he took from the level where the Yidden were in the state of being engraved to the level of where the Yidden are just being written. And he wrote and he brought down that source into the writing level of the Yid, into the Yid down here, like he's in the level of written, by thereby empowering him and giving him the energy of his source. That so it should be afterwards, that these are their journeys for and to back to their source above. So this is the point over here about why Moshe Rabbeinu had to be. What I mentioned yesterday about going higher than the source, that's going to be in the next paragraph. Any questions? Okay. Top of the last page, page Ches. So now the Rebbe is going to add in the style, like the Rebbe always says, that there has to be every Yerida has to be for the sake of an Aliyah. So you can't just say that the Moitza'ehem at the beginning of the pasuk and the Moitza'ehem at the end of the pasuk is the same. It says that Moitza'ehem, that they traveled and they are empowered from their Moitza'ehem to the Mas'ehem, from their route down to their journeys, and then they take their journeys back up to the Moitza'ehem. You can't just say that it's back to the same place, or else what have you gained? So the Rebbe says, we'll see the conclusion of this matter over there on Kutitoidom. So the Alter Rebbe says, Ve'efsher, and it's possible. So the Alter Rebbe says it's possible, but the Rebbe says that it's a sure thing. That they're sent to their a place where they came out from, where they were extracted from, is higher than what's drawn down initially from their place of extraction. Perhaps this is similar to what there was a discussion with the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said something in Indian Chassidus, and he said it like as a given. And the Rebbe Rashab said, where do you take this from as a given? When I mentioned this in the Maimer, I mentioned it as a possibility. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, what's a possibility by the Rebbe is by me of Ados. So the same thing, what the Alter Rebbe says, ve'efsher, it's possible. So the Rebbe just takes it as a given. This must be that the Moitza'eim is a higher level, the second Moitza'eim. And the Rebbe explains, the idea behind this is, like explained in many places, since the descent of the Nisham is for the sake of an ascent, it's impossible to say that the ascent is to the very same place, that from there was the descent, because the imkain maya tel should be yerida. If so, what was the benefit of the descent? And like we've always given the marshal, if you're going to invest money, you don't invest to get your money back. You invest to get a greater return. The same thing if you send down the neshama down here, and the Rebbe always uses the expression, all the pathways, all the roads are considered dangerous and are to be assumed to be dangerous. So you send down the neshama on such a dangerous trip, on such a difficult journey, and all it is just to be able to return to the same place it was before, to reach the same levels like it had before. What have we gained? Obviously, there must be an ascent and a return to a higher level. Therefore, we must say that the ascent is to a much higher place than it was before the Yerida. So let's go back. What did we identify before as the place where it descended from? What did we identify before as the level of the first Moitza Ehem? We said it's the level of Oisis HaChakika, the engraved letters. That's the Galif Glifu B'Tehira Elohi, engraved engravings in the supernal brilliance. And we identified it with the level of Neshama Shenasata B'Tehira. So in other words, its source was a level of Tehira. Therefore, if the ascent, if the return is to a higher level, so it must be it must be that the ascent is even higher than the level of it being pure. And the Rebbe adds an interesting point to it. Because the idea of calling it pure or brilliant, this is still an idea of a form. Chassidus says that any type of description, any type of form already indicates a limitation. If you could describe it, so the description itself, the form that you're giving it, the description you're giving it, limits it somewhat. So even the description of Tahiri, even the description, it's brilliant, it's pure, it's bright, it's shining, however you want to describe it as a description, seer, you're giving it form. You're giving it form, that's already a limitation. The ascent of the neshama is higher than form. It's higher than a place of limitation. It's the place that's even higher. Sometimes I think the Rebbe speaks about there's neshama shenasata. There's a level from nasata is even higher than tahira. But here he doesn't get into it. He just says tahira is only the source, and the ascent must be higher than the level of tahira. We can add and connect what we said previously. From what's explained in Likutei Torah at the end of Parshas Masei, this is also the conclusion of Sefer Bamidbar. With what's explained in Likutei Torah at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar. Parshas Masei is the conclusion of Chumash Bamidbar, and therefore Likutei Torah is the conclusion of the section in Likutei Torah that's devoted to Parshas Bamidbar. After Parshas Masei, we're going to go into Chumash Dvarim, and the Rebbe often notes, as we'll see, the Rebbe often connects the end with the beginning, like it says, not Tzfas Mesayfim. We're going to say in the beginning, in the paragraph, in the parentheses, but here the Rebbe looks at the end and the beginning of one Chumash, and we can say, like the Rebbe points out, that the pagination, the paging in the Maimorim in Likutei Torah is very interesting. In Torah Oyer, the page numbers, even though Torah Oyer includes Bereshis and Shmois, if I'm correct, the page number just follows along, and Shmois continues from Bereshis. But in Likutei Torah, every Chumash has its own pagination. It starts off with from page whatever, Beis or Aleph, on the section, the small section on Shmois. Then it starts again from the beginning, Bamidbar. Then what does Dvarim? It starts again from the beginning. And when you need to, note the page, you got to note that it's page this in section that, because the pagination, the pages repeat. So with the way the pages are divided, the Rebbe says, regardless of who divided the pages, it's all Bashgacha Pratis. So therefore, the whole Chumash Bamidbar is like its own sefer, because when you start Vardim, you're starting the pages all over again. So the Rebbe is going to look now at Chumash Bamidbar as its own sefer, and because of that, he's going to say, let's do like we always do when we do a siyum of a Masech that the Rebbe does, and a siyum in general, that when you come to the end of something, you connect it back to the beginning. According to the rule, notes that the end is embedded in the beginning, and the beginning is embedded in the end. So therefore, the Rebbe is going to bring a connection between what we just now explained in the Maimer of Elam Maseh L'Chutei Torah with what it says, the beginning of L'Chutei Torah on Chumash Bamidbar. He says, Ala Pasuk in the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar. In L'Chutei Torah it says on the Pasuk, Su as Rosh Goymer, raise up the head. Literally it means count l'gulgoloisam per head, ben esrim shana mailam, from 20 years and up. So the counting of the Bnei Yisrael was from 20 years old and up. And Al Pichsidis, the Rebbe explains, Se'u as Rosh, that's a level of raising the head. Ben Esrim Mu'inyan Shlem Samoichid, the idea of 20 years old is the idea of the perfection and completion of intellect. So, what's the connection with the completion and perfection of intellect? So, Alpin Nigla, it says that a child that inherits their parents' real property, the real estate, may not sell and do business with the inheritance until he's 20 years old. Because even though from Bar Mitzvah, a child is liable and their kinyonim and their business deals are valid, but we do not consider them mature enough to squander the inheritance on possible mistaken deals or just wasting it away because he wants to have a lot of toys and whatever, so he's going to waste his inheritance on getting cash to be able to fulfill his taivas. So he should not make any sales of his parents' estate until real estate until he's 20 years old. So we see this concept that 20 years old shows on the perfection of intellect. Al Bichsidis, it's also explained in L'Chutei Torah that 20, the number 20 shows on the perfection of intellect as well. So first of all, there's the concept that the letter Yud symbolizes the level of, first of all, 20 symbolizes the level of Chachma and Bina. In many Gemara, it brings down, for example, by Sarah Imenu, it says that she was 127 years old. So it explains the significance of 100 and explains the significance of 7 to the 7 midas. And 20 is Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina, the way each one includes in it 10. The way Chachma is made up of the 10 spheres, and the way Bina is made up of the 10 spheres. So that's the perfection of intellect. So he says, the level of Ben Esrim, that's the level of the head, the intellect, as it is on its own, before anything is raised up. Now we're saying, Su'u es Rosh B'nai Yisrael. It's not just enough to have the level of the intellect on its own, but we have to raise it up. to raise up the head, to raise up the intellect, to raise up and to elevate the head even higher. Also, but there it's explained, similar to what's explained previously concerning the ascent that occurs through the descent below. So too he explains in a similar vein that there's the shleimus hamoichin on its own, and then that's what's created through our avoidam, that we reach a much higher level, a level that is beyond the level of the perfection of the intellect. We reach all the way up to higher than that. Let's see note 28. This mimer again stops in the middle. They only had notes on this mimer. Note 28 over here, he says, Ulay hakavana lamavur, perhaps the Rebbe's intention is to what's explained over there. The idea that raise up the head to their skulls, which, by the way, the skull is a level that's higher than the head. Gulgoilas, it surrounds the head. A lot of times, Gulgoilas has to do with will. So the brain itself, the head itself, is a level of intellect. And Su'u, as Roish B'nai Yisrael, Ligulgoilas, you're raising up the brain, you're raising up the intellect, you're raising up the Chachma Bina to the level that's beyond it, the level of Rotz. Well, the Kasher, Rotz Natach Nanim Shabchinas Roishim Moichnam Lebashim Beguf Nefesh, to connect the lower will. The lower will is not the essential will that's a level of goylus, but the will that's resulting from a person's intellect. When a person thinks into something and understands why something is good, so he wants to do it. That's a will that's created by the intellect. And the intellect that's enclosed, the soul, the body, and the soul. We need to take that will, the will that's a result of the intellect, and to bind it and connect it and to elevate it above to the source where it was chiseled out from, where it was hewn out from, to specifically their gulgoilus, their level of skull. The skull itself, meaning the will itself, that's the source of the neshama above. So in other words, the root of the neshama above. It's not enough to have the intellect the way it's down here. It's not enough to have the will the way it's based on the intellect down here, but to connect it to the will, that's higher than that. And how is that done? That's done through a Yeridul Tzorech Aliyah. He says, Mamshech Levayim, and he continues to explain. The descent of the neshamas of the Yidden, to become enclosed in the body and the animal soul in this world. The Yerida Gedolah is a great descent. But the descent is for the level of the ascent. And then the Maimer over there goes on to explain different details and different levels of the ascent, where and how high does it go up to, etc. By the way, while I was looking at this footnote, I reminded myself that I also want to point out a different footnote that we were talking about. That in the earlier paragraph, it says the Alter Rebbe said that it goes up to a level of Mesa'y, which is higher than the previous Mesa'y. So he says that in Mesa'y itself, it goes an Ak, an Adam Kadman, and there's the level of the lower level of Ak and the higher level of Ak. So the lower level of Ak is the originating place, and the higher level of Ak is the place that the person goes up. Or if the level of Arich and Atik, that's the source, is the Arich of the general Seder Shtalshlus, and it goes up all the way to Atik, that's higher than Seder Shtalshlus. Any question?
I have a couple questions.